Hola, you are listening to First Gen Healing, a podcast on Latinx healing and awakening journeys. And today we are here for a special part 2 with Ana.
Hi, super excited.
Yay! So, Ana, my whole thing is helping First Gens be more authentic and shed parts and layers of them that maybe because of conditioning or upbringing they took on. And so I felt like we could maybe talk about being authentic, but this time in La Cama, given that you are a sexóloga. What
Yeah,
do you think?
definitely. I really like to decipher what I call the mom voice. This could be anyone's voice.
Mm,
Just a heads up, I just call it the mom voice because that's how it shows up for me. It's really deciphering like whose voice is that in your head? Because oftentimes we hear things like I'll hear from my clients all the time of like, oh, I feel like I'm gonna get in trouble, or I have like this voice that's
mm,
telling me like whatever it is that I'm doing is wrong. And it's not even anything necessarily like specific, it just like kind of happens. And what it's often talked about as is like, okay, I believe this thing, but I also have this thought that it's wrong. So, for
mm-hmm,
example, it could be like having premarital sex. It could be, I don't know, going down on your man or like whatever it is. It doesn't really matter what it is. And so, what I like to tell my clients is like really deciphering like, is that voice that is showing up in your head and is maybe sounds like you because it's in your voice, is that actually your voice or is that mom's? Is that your tia's? Is that maybe your dad's voice or some other family member? Is that maybe like a family friend that you were around a lot growing up? Was it
mm-hmm.
some maybe a teacher or like from church somewhere, some other media, right? Whose voice is that? And is that what you actually believe or not? And really getting
Mm-hmm.
clear on like, is that what you believe or not? And then once you decide that, if you decide that, like, actually, no, I actually don't believe that, I think that's bullshit or like whatever, right? That's not mine. I like to present to my clients with the following analogy. So, like, let's imagine you live in a house, right? And someone comes over and they leave like a pair of shoes that is like two sizes too small. You wouldn't be like,
Okay.
well, they left them here. Now I have to wear these shoes and I have to walk around with my feet all cramped, right? No, you would give them back, but you wouldn't hold on to them for like forever, right? But that
Right.
is what we do with these thoughts that are not ours. And so the first step is really figuring
Mm-hmm.
out what thoughts are ours and what are not. And like, do we agree with them or not? And then getting rid of them if they're not ours. And that doesn't
Ooh.
mean that they won't show up. Like, we'll probably still hear it. I hear my mom's voice in the back of my head all the time. But the clearer you are on what it is that you believe, the lower that voice gets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I love that you use that analogy because actually, I think in the work that I do, similarly, there is that voice, that judgy voice that has
Mhm.
these really strong opinions, right? Or maybe even these strong or harsh judgments about the person. For me, like I kind of tell them, you would never talk to a friend like that. I don't think so. I
Yeah.
even envision you speaking to a friend like that. So it's so interesting that you keep that voice. So I love, what you're saying. Like, is it something that you want to keep around or does it not fit in your world like the shoe and you can get rid
Yeah.
of?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I guess confusion is the word I'll use. Like that comes up for many people is because it sounds like you, right? It's in your head,
Yeah.
it's your
Yeah.
voice. So you're like, oh, do I actually believe that? But really,
Yeah.
it's just something you heard over and over and over again. And it happens to be in your voice a lot of the time because it's showing up in your head. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
like there are sayings that my mom and my grandma used to use all the time. They're like not even sexually related, they're just like random dichos, right? And I find myself saying them sometimes or thinking them, but they're in my voice. And I've probably like, I didn't come up with those, right? It just like
Yeah.
kind of comes out. And so it can be really confusing when you're like, oh, maybe I do believe that, right? So it's really about deciphering
Mm-hmm.
like, do you believe that? Like, just because you have that, like it pops up in your head, doesn't mean that you actually believe it.
Yeah. Do you find in working with people that, like, maybe in teenage, early 20 years, people broke out of those thresholds or those judgments, let's say, like in experimenting mode, but then as they get older, they kind of retract back into, like, maybe rule following and upholding those judgmental or those I guess limits, that maybe others put on us.
Yeah, definitely. So it's I wouldn't say it's like across the board, but it is very common. And I think this is very like a media trope as well of like the rebellious teen. And like maybe it's something to say about
Mm,
teenage brains. I don't know. But yeah, it's very much so like the teen like finding their way or like discovering who they are, self-exploration, like all of that, right? So they try like a bunch of things and then somewhere like early mid 20s, we begin like judging ourselves and being like, "Oh, no, I'm a quote unquote real adult now. I need to be like more conservative or more like real adult and like all of these things." And so we really turn into oftentimes our parents, but we really kind of revert back to like what we've always known. It's like the way
mhm,
that I imagine it in my head, I'm very much like an analogy person, like in my brain. And so I think we go from like one end of the pendulum, which is like our parents and their beliefs or like who we were raised around. So that could be church, school, whatever. And then in our teens, we go like the complete opposite. We're like absolutely nothing to do with them. I don't want to do that. Super all the way on the other end. And then when we get into that like early adulthood, we often like swing all the way back. We never quite land in the
mhm,
middle. And what I'm
mhm,
noticing with my clients is like they've swung all the way back and they're really trying to like get into the middle of like, okay, there were some things that I did in my exploratory phase that I liked. There are some things that I like, there's lessons that I learned, right? And I'm really trying to find like what it is for me. Like I'm in the middle and finding the middle in between the two of those. Like I always tell my
yeah.
clients, like you don't have to get rid of like everything that your parents taught you. Like you get to decide what you want to take. Like it's like picking and choosing. Like you get to decide. It's all a choice.
Yeah, and the reason I ask, I think, is because like I've noticed a lot of Christians, I think, become independent, right? Whether it's financially, they move out, they buy their home, etc.
Hmm.
But individuation is then coming up with your own vision of life, your own ideas, right? And kind of living by your own beliefs. And in that pendulum that you're saying, I imagine like, yeah, people go kind of like, I'm going to explore the world and do my own thing. And then they're like, never mind. Or not never
Yeah.
mind, but like you
Yeah.
said, now I'm a real adult, so let me like kind of get closer to my parents or, and they
Yeah.
start to uphold the similar beliefs. And so then that
Hmm.
enmeshment that like comes back, even if you're living outside of home, even if you're in your
Totally.
own marriage. Hmm.
Yeah, and I think this like I'm so glad you mentioned this, and I don't remember if we talked about this in episode one or not, but I feel like I talk about this every day of my life, but it's
Okay.
okay. There's like this notion, I guess, in society that like if we like one thing, we don't like the other thing. Like,
Mm,
and it's very
okay.
like black and white, right? There's no room for gray whatsoever. And so it's like the example that I always give, like if you say that you like chocolate, like then you must hate vanilla. If you
Mm,
say that like you don't like something that your parents do, then you must hate every single thing that they do. And like you're not close to your
mm,
parents, right? It's often like what we're told, but it's like there's room for gray in there. And we often don't talk about it like that. And so I think that's oftentimes like that's why this whole like pendulum swing happens, is because as a
mm,
culture, we are as like in Latinos, right? In Latino culture, we are very like family oriented. We are very group oriented. And the United States in particular is very about like the individual and like all of that. And I think what happens is we conflate that with having our own ideas. And so, what I mean by that is like you can have beliefs that are different from your parents and still be in like a collectivist society, right? Like you can still
mhm.
be very like family based and family oriented. Like you don't have to go into individualism just because you have your own opinions and ideas. Like those
Yeah.
are not the same thing.
Yeah. You're not leaving the tribe. just because you have
Right.
different
Totally.
beliefs.
Yeah. Like you
Yeah.
can have your own ideas, and actually groups work better when there are diverse populations. Like studies have shown that the more diverse groups are, like actually the better off they are. And so by you
Mm.
having like obviously you have similar identities to your parents, right? But like having your own ideas and bringing that to the table is actually beneficial to the family, to the group, to the
Mm-hmm.
community.
Yeah. So embracing your authenticity in bed or outside of it allows others to do the same, I think. Too.
Yeah. So yeah, I we like got way off the topic of sex, but as always, things are always connected. So yeah. So when we think in terms of like the bedroom, right? Like I always tell my clients because this is very common. And again, I predominantly work with women, but I have many women come to me that are like, oh, well, my partner this, my partner that. And I think we have a tendency as
Mm.
human beings to just like kind of like blame everybody else. Like it's easier. Like, I mean, I do it as well. Like it's, no shame here, right? Like we do that. And so they come in like, blaming their partner. And I'm like, okay, I understand that
Mm.
you have issues with some things that your partner does. There are issues that are happening in your sex life. Like, what if we just focused on like what you can do? And oftentimes I'm met with resistance, right? It's like, well, why do I have to be the one to like do all of the things? Like,
More.
why isn't he doing anything? Right. And the reason why I have my clients focus on them is because they can only control them. They can't control
Yeah.
their partner. So you're essentially wasting time like ruminating about how your partner doesn't do this right and they, I don't know, don't fold the laundry or like whatever the hell it is, right? And so if you can focus on you and what you can control, then it's going to be a better experience for you independent of what your partner does. If you ultimately decide, you know what, this person isn't for me, then that's fine. And like we can work through that. And I think oftentimes that's what people are scared of
Mm.
as well, is
Yeah.
finding out like, oh, actually, this isn't the type of person that I want to be with. So it's easier to just blame them and hope that they will change because that ultimately means then that
Mm.
we will stay together. So I
Mm-hmm.
think in part that's some of where that comes from. But I also teach my clients to focus on their own pleasure in bed. And I'm often met with like, well, that's selfish. And like, sure, like semantically speaking, because being selfish is really just focusing on yourself. But you are in control of your pleasure, not your partner. And they are in control of their pleasure and not you. So if you're enjoying yourself, I mean, this is like a made up statistic, but like 99% of the time, if you're enjoying yourself, your partner is also going to enjoy yourself, right?
Mm.
The only reason that if your partner is enjoying themselves and you're not, it's because you're blaming them for like you're in your head about like,
Um,
oh, well, I'm not getting pleasure, right? Whereas if you were focused on your pleasure, it wouldn't really matter, right? And again, it's about like when you focus on yourself, it's like helping the community, or in this case, like the pair, right? The couple, or maybe you're
yeah.
having sex with multiple people at once. That's fine too. But it really, when you are focused on your own pleasure, it really just adds to the experience of everyone.
Mm. Okay, I'm trying to see like how to ask this question. Like, well, I don't know. Maybe it would just be interesting to see if men really are just focused on their pleasure, which then causes the other. Like, is it because they tend to be selfish the way that women are not used to being, and so they're fine, and that's what creates the gap? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, like what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? And I also think that there are like probably
Mm.
several reasons for this. I think, yes, in part, many men are focused on their own pleasure. And so, yeah, like that does lead to like better sex. And historically speaking, that was like the quote unquote point of sex, right? It's like sex was to procreate.
Oh.
And in order to procreate, a man has to orgasm. And typically, orgasm and ejaculation happen at the same time because technically, the the only thing that we need in order to procreate when we talk about like traditionally speaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
Between like man and woman, penis and vagina, whatever, is we need ejaculate, right? So we need the sperm to come out of the penis, go into the vagina, and conception happens, right? And orgasm doesn't need to happen with that. But I also think that the narrative around pleasure, like sexual pleasure for men, it's very much
Mm,
like male centered, right? Sexual pleasure in general has, historically
yeah.
speaking, been very male centered. So there isn't really any doubt in many men's mind whether or not they're going to have pleasure. They just assume it's going to be really great. And the message that women get is kind of the opposite. And yes, there is
Mm,
some conversation about like women having amazing sex, but it's often based on the partner that they are with. And you're like, well, fuck, I'm married and now I'm with this person that like sex is horrible. But really, what's happening, it's not your partner a vast majority of the time. Like, there are exceptions to the rule. And like, ultimately, it's you not taking responsibility for your own pleasure.
mm.
And so we aren't taught that. And so then, of course, we're kind of just left like our power is left in our partner's hands. And so, like, do they care about our pleasure or not? And like all of that.
Whoa, okay. So when you say like take control of your own pleasure, does that mean communicating to them or does that mean internally like you're not actually changing that dynamic, you're just focusing on you, or is it actually like no, I'm going to ask for what I want, I'm going to speak up?
Yeah, I think it's both. So
Okay.
oftentimes what I see happening is that women will be like, well, like my partner just doesn't do what I want. Well, are you telling them? And are you communicating with them in a way that is effective? Or are you just being like, well, fuck, like you never give me head and I'm always
Mm,
giving you head and then it results in an argument, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
how are you communicating it? And a vast majority of the time, what I notice, and this happens across the board, so I'm not like woman bashing here, but like we don't know how to explain what it is that we want, or like the most common thing that I hear is like, well, like I want change but I don't know what I want. And
Okay.
what I
Mm-hmm.
teach my clients is really how to identify what it is that you want. So many women will say, and I keep talking about women because that is like predominantly who I work with, but they'll be like, oh, I want more foreplay. Like, okay, but what does that mean? Because that could mean 7 million things. Like, my mind goes in 7 million directions
Mm-hmm.
when you tell me that. What does that mean? How
Mm-hmm.
much do you need? Why exactly do you need it? And I know that sounds like a really weird question, but like, what exactly about the foreplay? Like, what is that helping? Like, how is that helping you? Why
Ooh.
is that desirable, right?
Yeah.
Because there is this assumption, right, that like you need to warm up. And like, yes, that is true to some extent. But like, what do you specifically need? Or are you just basing it off of what you've heard, right? Are you not
Mm-hmm.
orgasming when you have sex? And then you're just like, well, if I had more foreplay, then I would orgasm. Well, that's not necessarily true. So
Yeah.
I really invite my clients to get really like specific. And I know it's like tedious, but like, for example, if you're like, oh, well, I like when my partner goes down on me. Why? What about that experience do you like? Right?
Yeah.
Some people will say the connection. Okay, well, we can create connection in other ways. Your partner doesn't need to go down on you. That's not a requirement. You might like that, but if they don't, then like that's something that you need to consider. Is it
Mm-hmm.
because you really like, I don't know, the pressure on like your labia majora, right? So where their hair grows, you really like that pressure. Okay, great. What sexual positions can we do that gives you that same pressure if that's not something that he's willing to do, right? So it's very
Mm-hmm.
rarely the actual act that we need to incorporate. It's the sensations that you are feeling that is then getting you
Yeah.
turned on. And that takes
Mm.
away from like all the like blame and resentment and annoyance of your partner. But we have to
Yeah.
also realize that our partners, independent of sex or gender, like they are their own person, they have bodily autonomy. They don't have to go down on you just because you like it, just like you don't have to down on them if you don't want to. But if you're forcing
Right.
yourself to, that often result, even when you don't want to, that often leads you into this belief of like, oh, well, he should be going down on me because I do it to him. Well,
Mm-hmm.
no, he shouldn't. If he doesn't want to, then he shouldn't. And I get this argument all the time from people. Well, like, he should care about my pleasure. But you can care about someone's pleasure and also not want to do something sexually. Maybe your partner really likes I don't know. Let's imagine that you're a woman and you really like double penetration. That doesn't mean that your partner that you are monogamous with has to agree
Mm.
to bring in a third person because you like double penetration. Like that
Right.
doesn't make any sense. So it's up
Mm-hmm.
to us, and we totally don't have to do this, but it's doing us a disservice if we're not, to really figure out what it is that we want and how to get that, independent if our partner is willing to do it or not. And if our partner is not willing to do like 99 of the 100 things that you want to do, then maybe you're not a good fit, and maybe that's something that you need to consider.
Yeah. Woo. Okay, so many good points. All right, let me see. Let me not forget them. I think number one is as you're working with people, you're also helping them, you're giving them permission, one, to say no to the things that they don't want to. So as much
Mhm.
as like you're kind of maybe letting them know, hey, your partner has a right to say no to you. It's like giving you as the other partner the permission back to say no to them, because if you're just doing something because you think you have to and then you resent them for it and then you expect something like back, right? Then it really is creating like I don't know, some sort of like toxic bubble there, in the relationship, I think. So even just getting
Totally.
that permission back to be like, hey, I actually don't enjoy doing this. Like, it's communication, right? Like it's essentially opening that door of communication with
Yeah,
them.
definitely.
There was one more thing that I wanted to bring back. Oh, yes. Finding like the underlying purpose of what you're asking for. That's so
Mm-hmm.
cool to me, because as you were saying that and you were talking about like oral, right? Like I thought of connection. Like as a woman, for me, it's like, oh, that makes me feel connected to the person. And
Mm-hmm.
it makes me feel like, oh, I'm here with you. Like I'm present. The guy is with
Mm-hmm.
me, present. Like, and we're about to engage in this, rather than like, boom, let's just go. So
Yeah,
I love that you said like it's like find what does that do for you? Is it like it makes you feel safe? It makes you feel taken care of, loved, like what is that thing?
totally.
And we did start off talking about like the pendulum. So one thing I wanted to talk about is like there are, I think, things on a spectrum when it comes to sex that maybe push us one way or the other. So whether it's like religion, right? And like the way that our family upholds religion, and so maybe certain things are looked at as really bad or del diablo or something like that,
Mhm.
right? And then there's this other aspect where it's like porn and the over sexualization of Latinas, and like how we're supposed to be spicy, así, no como muy this,
Yeah.
I don't know. And
I know
so,
exactly what you mean.
yeah. So I'm like wondering, like, well, I just think like it's worth talking about like how those ends of the spectrum can maybe actually hold us back from being really authentic in bed, because we have those things kind of ingrained within us.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think the way that I'm picturing it is like the way that we are raised, however sex is talked about, right? Whether it's like a church, home, whatever, is like the whole our home beliefs like we were talking about earlier. And then the other side of the pendulum of
Mm,
like, like sex work and like porn and like all of those things um is like the rebellious teen, right? And
yes,
it's and
yes.
what I find happening is that many people, when they are trying to figure out what it is they want sexually, is they kind of just try things that they see, that they're exposed to. They're like, well, maybe this is the
Mm,
thing and maybe this is the thing, and it's like a lot of exploration, which isn't necessarily bad. Like there's nothing wrong with exploring, but what I want to invite people to do that are in like this period of time or just interested in doing it in general is going inward first rather than just like, for lack of better word, like mocking what you see. Like what are you drawn to? What sounds exciting? What do you like? Right? And really just exploring in that way. When you have sex with
mm-hmm.
someone, when you have sex with yourself, right? Really just exploring in that way rather than doing like copycat things like porn and I don't know, whatever else is you want to put in that category isn't necessarily bad. And there are people that actually like those things, right? And I don't think that's there's nothing wrong with that, right? But I think oftentimes many people end up in what we'll call the more extreme end of the spectrum, compared to
Mm,
like what is supposedly like the norm, is because they're like, oh, well, in order for me to be like sexually open, I have to do all these things. And like, no, you don't. Like,
Mm-hmm.
sex can literally be anything you want it to be, and like you get to decide. And the way that you decide that is by exposing yourself to things and exploring on your own. And so again, if you want to watch porn, if you want to hire a sex worker, if you want to like go to a dungeon, like by all means, go ahead. And don't do it because you think that's what you're supposed to do. Do it because
Mm-hmm.
you are drawn to it.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Like, I think we think, oh, more pleasure equals more extreme, right? Maybe, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm not experiencing what I think I should be. So maybe it means like we kind of move up the scale and we like amp it up
Yeah.
rather than like deepening into whatever is already possible for us.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if we talked about this last time or not. I can't remember. But it's very much we are a society where it's like, oh, something's wrong or there's an issue, so I need to go out and get something. Right. So it's like
Yeah.
many people come to me of like, oh, maybe we just need like different positions is like a common thing that I hear from like everybody, independent of like sexuality, gender, and sex. Like it's just like maybe I need a different position. Maybe I need a specific toy. Are there specific um porn sites that you can recommend, right? There's like
Mm.
they're always like looking for more rather than going inward and being like, okay, what do I already know that I like? How can I get more of that? Rather than
Mm-hmm.
going out and doing extra things. And there's often like, maybe I just need to find out a way for us to have more sex. Well, if you're having shitty sex now, you're just going to have more shitty sex if you decide to have sex. So like,
Mm.
let's figure out what are the parts that you like and like get more of that rather than going out and like purchasing all of these things that maybe you're never going to use.
Yeah. I don't know why I just thought of yesterday I recorded with a couples therapist and I was thinking like maybe she runs into similar where it's like we're not having enough sex, right? But like there's probably a
Yeah.
deeper underlying reason like I don't feel connected to you, right? Or I don't feel
Hmm.
love. Like yeah, there's ways of like
Yeah.
it shows up and we internalize it and maybe like think the solution is more, right? Or different or
Hmm.
but it could be something very different. Yeah. So
Yeah, and
cool.
oftentimes it's not even sex related. Like, I was talking with a friend the other day, and I was like, "Well, it a lot of times, and this happens it's very, very common with women. But a lot of people will think they have like según low sexual desire or like no sexual desire,
Mm,
and I'm like, well, when's the last time you've eaten? Like an actual meal, not just like running around with a protein bar or something, right? Like, when's the last time you actually sat down and had a meal? When's the last time you had a vegetable? When's the last time you drank a glass of water? Or you got 6 to 8 hours
mm,
of quality sleep, right? Like, what
mhm.
are your stress levels like? If all of that is not taken care of, and I'm not saying it has to be perfect. So don't think that. But like if you are constantly dehydrated, constantly like starving your body essentially of the things that it needs, never
Yeah.
moving your body, right? Always stressed. Your body's not going to want to have sex because it's like we're just trying to keep
Mm,
you alive. We don't care if you procreate right now. And actually, if you tried to procreate, you probably wouldn't end up pregnant because it's not a viable environment for an
mm,
embryo. So, like,
mhm.
if you are one trying to get pregnant, or if you're just noticing that you have a low sexual desire, like, are you actually taking care of yourself? And I don't think that that's talked about enough. It's like,
Yeah.
well, we just need to, do things better in the bedroom. But the things outside of the bedroom are impacting whether or not your body actually has a desire to have sex in the first place. Yes, a lot
Wow.
of it is mental, but a lot of like the mind and the body are connected, right? And so like
Mhm.
if your body is like yearning for like sleep and hydration and nutrition, right? All of that and you're not getting it, it's not going to want to have sex.
And you give it more sex, you're like, it's like, can we just
Right.
sleep? And like, no, we're
Yeah.
gonna have more sex.
Right. And then you wonder why, because a lot of those same people then wonder why sex isn't enjoyable. Well, it's like you're
Mm,
not going to be as wet if you're dehydrated, right? If you're so tired,
mhm.
it's going to be really hard for you to become aroused. If you're really stressed, your nervous system is probably constantly activated. So your body isn't supposed to become aroused when like your nervous system is activated. So it just doesn't make sense, like
Mm,
biologically, physiologically speaking. So then you're just
mhm.
having more sex and it's shitty. And then you're just like reinforcing this idea that the sex with your partner is shitty.
Yeah. Wow. So interesting. Thank you so much for sharing this
Yeah, of
information, because
course.
I think you're right. Like I don't think it's talked about enough, and I think, like, of course our circles try to help us when we complain, let's say, and but their interpretations aren't rooted in this knowledge, right? So it's more
Hmm.
like, I pues tell him que he, like he should go
Right.
down, like that, right? Like it's these
Yeah.
these automatic responses that are based on conditioning, essentially, that
Hmm.
they got from their family.
Totally.
I wanted to maybe circle back a little bit to like the or maybe something that can walk us through everything we've talked about. So I've heard from certain people that, like, growing up in religion, self pleasure is like not is looked down upon, right? And so then there are many women who get into adulthood and are having sex, kind of like we're talking about, for the guy, but they don't
Hmm.
really have never even really and don't still like play with themselves, because there is
Hmm.
this internalized stigma of like the purpose of sex is for procreation and that kind
Hmm.
of stuff. So even though maybe they're willing to explore for their partner, they still don't do it for themselves. I'm wondering, like, if you've worked with someone like that, and what would be kind of the process, aside from like understanding, okay, there's this belief here, but what if it's
Hmm.
really hard to get rid of it? Like, what if that voice is really loud?
Yeah, so I like to be under the assumption that my brain is an asshole and that it's going to continue having these like annoying mom voice thoughts like forever. Because if I expect it to be there, then it's not that big of a deal when it's there. And when it's not, it's a pleasant
Mm.
surprise. The analogy that I always give is like my partner loves to scare me. And to this, I never expect it. I don't know why, but I don't. But every single time I get scared because I don't expect it. But on the rare occasion that I do expect him to do it and I'm like semi on alert, I'm not as scared, right? And so the same idea. Like these thoughts don't have to go away. They can show up. Our brains offer us useless thoughts all the time. But we
Mm.
don't necessarily listen to them. But oftentimes what happens is with these thoughts that show up in like mom's voice or whoever else, right? Because they've been repeated so often, we kind of default to those thoughts. And so I think it's really just about reminding yourself what you actually believe. Now, I think that solo sex, masturbation, whatever you want to call it, is one, it's very healthy and it's also very helpful in discovering what it is that you like and the way that you like to be touched in a very like low stakes or like low pressure environment because it's just you. When you,
Mhm.
sure, you can explore your body while you're having partnered sex, but things kind of get complicated because then you're having thoughts about them. And even if they're good thoughts, right? It's just like, I like to think of it as like a science experiment, right? It's just adding more variables to the situation. And we want to test one
Mm.
variable at a time. And so to
Mhm.
me, it's a lot easier to figure out what I like on my own and kind of bring that into the bedroom and then test it out that way versus changing
Okay.
multiple things at once. Like, I
Yeah.
really don't like weight loss analogies, but it's like the easiest thing that I can come up with. So, like, for example, if you're like, oh, I want to lose 5 pounds, and you're like, okay, I'm going to start drinking like 8 cups of water. I'm going to start eating, I don't know, 10 servings of vegetables a day. I'm going to start running around the block every day. Like, well, which one contributed, right? And which had the most contribution? You
Mm.
don't know. And
Mhm.
so, when it comes to sex, like, it's really important to figure out what was the contributing factor. And if you're having, you like, you're doing things to yourself and then your partner's doing things to yourself, like which one was it a combination? We don't know. And
Yeah.
so it's just easier in my mind to start with self-exploration, masturbation, solo sex, however you want to call it. That said, there are people listening to this that are never going to masturbate in their life. They're like, absolutely not, over my dead body. And that is totally fine. You don't have to. However, what I do encourage you to do is non sexual masturbation. And I know that sounds really weird, but that's what I call it. So that's
Okay.
what we're going to call it. You are exploring your body in a way that is not to try to pleasure yourself. You're just getting curious. So it's a different type of science experiment. You are
Okay.
exploring your body. You're putting hands on your body. You are maybe touching your body with different materials, things like that, different pressures, and just figuring out, like, oh, this feels good. Okay, you can stop there. Once you
Mm.
figure out that it feels good, you can stop. You're not doing it in a way to like reach orgasm or to like pleasure yourself necessarily. You're just trying to figure out the spots that feel good. In the same way, if your partner was giving you a massage and trying to figure out where the pain point was, like you'd be like, oh no, it's not that, it's not there. So he would move a little bit and be like, oh, okay, yeah, this is a knot. And then trying to figure out the other knots. It's the same thing, but you're doing it in a way that is like not necessarily to reach orgasm. If you decide then that you want to masturbate, that's totally fine. But for many of my clients, that is like helpful, and thinking of it as like, oh, I'm just trying to figure out what I like on my own to make it less complicated, and then I can bring it to my partner. If you don't want to do that either, you can totally do it with your partner. You just have to be really clear on like, okay, I liked this thing. You have to like evaluate, which I love sex evaluations. It sounds really shitty, but they're my favorite. So like, okay, after the sex session, I really liked this thing. Why did I like it? What about it did I like? And it's very tedious, but it is super helpful. And then you can figure out, okay, if I really liked, I'll use the example of the pressure on my labia majora again. Okay, what are other positions that we can try? What are things that I can do to get that when I'm having sex with my partner? So in my mind, it's a little more work, but if that's what you're comfortable with, then I recommend doing that.
Wow. So much that we learned today. Thank you so much for all of this information. And I think that this lines up with something that you have for the audience that they can download, perhaps.
Yes, definitely. So I have a free ebook that I would like to offer y'all. I have two, so I offer both of them here. And then, I'll send you links so they have it all. So my first ebook is for those of you that are looking for ways to like, quote unquote, like spice it up to, you're just like, I don't know what else to do. You're the type of person that like, quote unquote, wants more, right? This is just a way to get your brain thinking of different ways to have sex. As humans, we are very easily, we get stuck in the rut or like routines, things like that. So 69 Ways to Fuck from Boring to Mind-Blowing. That is a free ebook that is going to get you having mind-blowing sex. And then the second ebook that I have is called, this was based with my Latinas in mind. It's called Just Don't Get Pregnant and Other Dichos, a Latina's Guide to Deconstructing Cultural Messages and Enjoying Sex Sin Vergüenza. So I think this will actually relate to anybody that is like from an immigrant household, but it was made with Latinas in mind and Latino dichos.
Yeah. Yay! So exciting. So I'll make sure to put those in the description because they do definitely align with what we've been talking about. One, like just opening your mind to new ways or things. And then the other is like really diving into those dichos that we maybe even like start to repeat as we get older and become senoras. And it's like, no.
Yeah. When
So,
we're
like,
emerging into senorahood, we start saying
the sweater comes on and the dichos come through.
Yeah.
So it's a good time to like question, like what do they mean and do we want to keep them, and like, or we want to change them for ourselves. So super cool. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you so much, Anna, for coming back for a part 2. I feel like this was super informative, and I know that those that are listening, maybe, I personally, even talking about it, I told you after part 1, it's so interesting because like, even though I consider myself open-minded and like willing to have any conversation, I was a little bit like, did I just say orgasm? Like, so I love that we're opening people's minds through these conversations. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much. And you guys, if you found this helpful, please make sure that you like it, that you share it with your amigas, amigos, amigues. And we hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye.